students, today we are going to cover third part of the experiment, that is to operate the Raspberry Pi in Headless mode. Earlier we already seen the first two parts, that is introduction to Raspberry Pi 3 Model B, and how to install the Raspberry operating system on the memory card, which will be inserted into the Pi board. So let's start part 3 of the Raspberry Pi in Headless mode. Before we understand the steps to operate the Raspberry Pi board in headless mode, we should be familiar about what is headless. Headless meaning that when we are not going to connect any display with the Raspberry Pi board, at that time it is considered as a headless mode configuration. Along with that, we are also not going to connect USB keyboards or mouse, all that things with the Raspberry Pi. So in this case, we have questions how to operate this board. So here we are going to operate the Raspberry Pi mode in secure shell mode using third-party computers or laptops. So this procedure to operate this Raspberry Pi in headless mode, let's start. The first thing that we need to do is just remove the memory card from the Raspberry Pi board and just insert that memory card into the Windows Windows laptop or desktop through the adapter. When we are going to insert this memory card into the adapter, and it will be detected on the Windows operating system. At that time, this memory card will be detected as a boot partition. And this boot partitions will go inside, and in the boot folders, we are going to create the SSH file to make the secure site connections for third-party access. So we will create the SSH small letters will write without any extension. We'll create the notepad file. This notepad file will be saved without .txt extension. So when we will remove the .txt extension, it will be the warning. Without extension, file will be useless, and we'll confirm the warnings and we'll save the file into the boot folders of this memory card with the name SSH. Once it is over, we may move ahead. Yes, what's the purpose to create the SSH file? As I told, SSH file gives the access to the third party laptops or desktops. Here, earlier versions of Raspberry Pi, that was 1 and 2, this SSH file was already by default stored in the boot folders of this memory operating systems. But as Raspberry Pi Foundation people found that this can be unauthorized access sometimes when user is not aware about all this. So that's why we are not providing this SSH file in the boot folders, and because of this, we are because of this what you can say, this SSH file is not provided to the boot folders. It is created by the users when on the memory card in the boot folders. Second file that we need to create in the boot folder is nothing but wpa_supplicant.configuration file. So this file is required to be created. Okay, and notepad file we will create, and this notepad file will be saved with the extension .cum. This is configuration files. What is the purpose to create this configuration file? The purpose is to provide the Wi-Fi username and its password and country code. So you just see here country, that is written IN. So this IN is nothing but India. And here we pass our own Wi-Fi username, and here we pass its password. So this username and password will be the same wherever our desktop and Raspberry Pi both are connected on the same networks. So make sure that this Wi-Fi should be same for both laptop as well as Raspberry Pi board. Okay. So this file will be created in the boot folders of the this memory card. Okay. Once this is over, we will remove the memory card. And this memory card will be inserted into the Raspberry Pi board. Now, once we have inserted this memory card into the Raspberry Pi board, now we are allowing it to boot from the operating system, so from the memory card. So now operating system is going to be loaded on the Raspberry Pi board. Okay, once the operating system is loaded, we may get a command window. I'll show the demo also, students, don't worry. So we'll get the command window on the Raspberry Pi on the display. What you can see, we'll get the command window. So for that, first of all, we will find out the IP address of this Raspberry Pi. Okay, as we are not going to connect the display, so just this is connected to know the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. It is not necessary you to connect the display and we have to find out this IP address, but just for the sake, what you can say, matter understandings. For a while, we are going to connect the display and we are going to find out what is the IP address of this Raspberry Pi. If you will not do then it's okay, nothing, no any issue. I will show the how we are going to find out the what you can say IP address of the Raspberry Pi. This is just a simple way to find out the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. So to find out the IP address on a command prompt of this Raspberry operating system, we're going to pass the host name space -i command will be passed. So this command will provide you the IP address of this Raspberry Pi board. So we note it down this Raspberry Pi address. And next task is we have to find out the IP address. You just see this type of screen will appear when you are going to pass this command. So you can see on this black screen, you can see this is looking like the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. So that's 192.168.43.12. So this is nothing but the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, and this is nothing but the command window that looks like this. So next task is to fetch the IP address of the computer or desktop or laptop, so whatever we are using. So just see how we are going to get it. So by writing the command on Windows command prompt. Now it is a Windows command prompt. Earlier also Raspberry command prompt. Now on Windows command prompt, we are going to write the command ipconfig. Just systems ipconfig. Once we pass this command and press enter, we'll get the IPv4 address. As you can see on the screen, student, it is 192.168.43.36. So just note down this IP address, which is IP address of our laptop or desktop. So now we are going to IP address. One is for Raspberry Pi board, and second is for our laptop or desktop. So let's move ahead. So now we are going to use the advanced IP scanner. So advanced IP scanner is one of the software. How this is going to find out nearby, what we can say, nearby IP addresses of the computers or devices. So in this case, what we are going to do? What is the IP address of our laptop? Okay, what is the IP address of our laptop? That IP address we'll write here. So laptop's IP address, let's go back. It is 192.168.43.36. Okay. So here we are going to pass 192.168.43.12 to 254. So in this range, whatever nearby devices are our laptop, that will be found by this IP scanners. See, this advanced IP scanner can be installed permanently or can be installed in the what we can say momentarily in the portable modes. Okay. So you just see when I am going to press the scan button, so it is going to find out nearby devices. So it has already found. You just see Raspberry Pi. Okay, this is nothing but the IP address of the Raspberry Pi board, with which okay, with which is common Wi-Fi for both laptop as well as Raspberry Pi. So students, as I told, not necessary to use the command host name space -i. Here you can just see by pressing scan button, we can easily find out the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. So as I told, as it is headless mode, so obviously it is pure headless mode, but just for the simplicity, as I told, for a moment, we can connect the display to find out the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. Otherwise, it's okay. Through advanced IP scanner, we can find it out. Next task is just a minute, students. Next task is for a moment. This is a different slides like we find it here. Slide is over here. Let's find out the one. Yes. Next task after advanced IP scanner. The next task is nothing but this one. Here we are going to use one more software that is called Putty. From this Putty, we are going to execute the Putty setup, and once we execute the Putty setup, using the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, which you have found in the advanced IP scanner. Okay, we will write that host name. We can write either host name or we can write the IP address. Here I will pass the IP address because that I found on the advanced scanners, okay, IP scanners. So here I entered the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. Here I have selected the secure cell connection. Okay, and here I have connected with only on clean exit. Okay, so in this way settings will be made, configuration will be made, and now I'm going to press the open button. So what Putty configuration will allow? Putty configuration will allow you to access the Raspberry Pi, okay, on your laptop or on your desktop screen. Okay, so by pressing this open button, the next screen which will be appeared looks like this. So here you just see it will ask how you want to log in on this Raspberry Pi, because it is already granted the access to. So here by default username and password. Username and password for this board, not the Wi-Fi and talking students. It is not a SSID username or password. It is a password to access the Raspberry Pi as an administrator. Okay, so here it is asking us you want to log in as Pi, because Pi is by default username, and second is password. So password is by default Raspberry Pi, Raspberry one. So here we will pass the username as Pi and second is Raspberry Pi as a password. So when you will enter this, okay, this will allow to access the Raspberry Pi board on your laptop. So what happens now on your laptop, you will get this screen on a petty software like this. So this is nothing but the cursor of Raspberry Pi operating system, a command window, not cursor screen, sorry. And this will be the command window of this Raspberry Pi. And here we have to just pass the different commands and we can operate the Raspberry Pi in whatever mode you want to use it. Okay, whatever commands you want to pass, that command can be easily passed on this. So now Raspberry Pi can be operated on your desktop or laptop through this person. So if I will brief or summarize this, then I will say that first of all create the SSS file in the boot folder, of the memory card. Okay, thereafter we have to create one configuration file. Okay, and after creating the configuration file, we'll go for the advanced IP scanners. And in advanced IP scanner, we find out the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, and that IP address will be passed into the PuTTY software. And once we pass that PuTTY software IP address in PuTTY software, we'll close the open, and it will ask for username and password. Here we'll pass the username as a Pi and the password as a Raspberry. Okay, so it will give access of the Raspberry Pi board on the laptop or desktops. So I hope this is nothing but uses of Raspberry Pi board in headless mode on laptop or desktops. Okay, so in second experiment, so that we are going to cover is nothing but file structure of the Raspberry operating system and different commands. Okay, so I will show you the different commands which can be used on this command window of the Raspberry operating systems. Okay, so in next video experiments, we will see that. Okay. So I'm going to end the lab now, students.